Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thank you for joining the conversation today. It's going to be really interesting because we're talking wildfire. It's an incredibly dangerous reality in the climate crisis era. And standing at the front lines of this new reality are U.S. Forest Service Hotshot crews. Each crew is made up of between 20 and 22 highly trained wildland firefighters. And we're joined today by Kelly Ramsey, the first woman in about a decade to join the Rowdy River Hotshots, a California-based crew. Her new book, Wildfire Days: A Woman, a Hotshot Crew, and the Burning American West, recounts her 2 years fighting fires and learning about herself in the process. As we head into 2025, budget cuts have reduced the number of firefighters available to attack wildfires that have grown more severe by the decade. Kelly's memoir explores who becomes a hotshot, the intense physicality of their work, and the impact of fire on the American West, as well as on the people who live there. But will we have enough of these elite firefighting forces in the future? Only time and politics will tell. In the meantime, getting to know these ultimate first responders can help us all think about and act to prevent wildfire. I personally had just a fraction of the experience we're about to talk about when I was a member of the Youth Conservation Corps in high school, when a lightning strike ignited a fire in the Kittitas National Forest in Washington, where I was working. It was not a time of drought when fires can spread hundreds of feet in a minute, but I'll tell you something, seeing flames leap up a Douglas fir and spread to the next through the canopy is terrifying. But I also found it centering, kind of invigorating. It was a call to get to work. And despite the odds, a group of kids managed to contain a fire in about an hour. But we were lucky because we had experienced foresters with us who helped direct our work. Facing the million-acre blazes that occur today is an entirely different experience. And I've been looking forward to talking to Kelly since I read her book. And it's just out and available for you to read today. You can learn more about Kelly and Wildfire Days at kellylynnramsey.com. Kelly Lynn Ramsey is all one word with no space and no dash, and Lynn is spelled with two N's. kellylynnramsey.com. We're going to get to the conversation with Kelly right after this quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome to the show, Kelly. It was really fascinating to read your book, and it's a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Mitch. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. The Rowdy River Hotshots, it's a really amazing group of people. What's their life like? What's it like to be a hotshot crew?
Yeah, so Rowdy River is a pseudonym, just wanted to note
Mhm.
that. So being on a hotshot crew is a pretty intense job. When you're in the thick of the season, you go out and you work usually 16-hour days at minimum. And the job involves a lot of creating fireline and burning, doing what's called a back burn or a
Mhm.
backfire. So those are the two primary tasks. And creating Fireline, it's really physically intensive. You hike into the backcountry carrying usually a lot of heavy weight on your back, really steep slopes. And then you're either running a chainsaw and cutting down trees and brush to open this swath of the forest in order to create a fire break, or as I was, you're using a hand tool. So you're kind of bent
Mhm.
over digging all day, creating this line, which is like a 2 foot path. In a way, it's not a path, but it looks like one of just bare mineral soil. So it's a lot like digging ditches all day and sometimes all night. And then yeah, the burning, the intentionally burning in order to deprive the forest of fuel. So it's a lot of really rigorous manual labor, but it's also technical. It's a job that requires expertise in how to,
Yeah.
conduct these activities.
When I started reading the book, I was wondering if I would learn what kind of people become hotshots. And what I found is the whole book is about that. And you go into your background, into the background of various people on the line with you. Tell us about the Rowdy River crew. Why did
Yeah.
they become firefighters?
Yeah, I would say a lot of us became firefighters because we really loved the outdoors. That was a huge part of it. But I think a lot of people also were just sort of really driven to work hard, to do work that is demanding, and to help. I think a lot of the people I worked with really want to, save communities. They want to protect the forest so that everything doesn't burn, so people are,
Mhm.
there's a lot of different motivations for being there, but I think most of us really wanted to do something that was challenging and meaningful.
Challenging is kind of an understatement. It seems like the preparation is as intense as becoming a Marine. And you did
Yeah.
this in your 30s. Uh, what was the training like?
Yeah, so I trained, and I think most people do, for at least 6 months in the off season before even coming to work. So in Northern California, the crews come on in somewhere between April and June. We would usually come on in May, early May. So I started training the previous October. And it's a lot of hiking, carrying at least 45 pounds on your back. But when I say hiking, I don't mean a trail that kind of zigzags back and forth to climb a slope. You're literally climbing the spine of the ridge. So it'll be 45 degrees or
Yeah.
more, pretty much vertical slope. So a lot of the work is just, every single day through that off season or 6 days a week, hiking like that. But then there's also running. You need to be able to run distance and hills and sprints. You need to be able to run a mile and a half in 10 minutes and 30 seconds. There's pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, dips, wall sits, weight training. So, as you said, I think one of the best things you can correlate it to is like the Navy SEALs or some sort of
Mhm.
elite military team because it really is so physically intense.
You describe them as elite, but these are remarkably human, ordinary people who, like you say, love the environment. And
Yeah.
as you think about their experience and yours in particular, how does it change you to love nature and defend it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you have to get your heart broken again and again, right? Because
Hmm.
if you love nature and you're seeing it burn a lot of the time. But on the other hand, it does feel really rewarding to be able when when you can protect something, when you can defend something. I think the way it changed me is that I learned that, sometimes you can make a difference and you can protect, this part of the forest or this ridge or whatever. Sometimes you can, it's not possible. But almost every time, nature does regenerate and things do grow back. Maybe not exactly the same, but
Yeah.
it, it was really cool to learn that there's no end to nature. Like it's even when you see a forest fully incinerated, it's not dead. It's not, or it might be at that moment, but it's not going to be dead forever. And animals do come back to burn areas really quickly, and birds. And so, yeah, just that lesson in how the earth rebuilds itself, regenerates was really amazing.
What was it like to fight your first fire? Were you afraid? Were you exhilarated? Were you surprised by it?
All of the above, I would say. Yeah. So my first bigger fire was called the bushfire. It was in Arizona outside of Mesa. And yeah, I think the first day I was a little bit afraid. We started to hike in this two-track road, and then we got pulled back out because the fire was approaching too quickly.
Hmm.
And I actually think in hindsight, we were totally fine. We had plenty of time. We didn't have to run back out or anything. But at the time, I just didn't really know. And so I was a little bit scared, yeah, because I was like, wait, how fast is the fire coming? Are we going to get burned over? What is happening? So I had that moment. But then, I also had some of my first moments of seeing a real smoke column and
Hmm.
doing a burn operation. So, burning intentionally off of a fire line at night. And that experience is just really kind of magical, that fire in the darkness. And usually you get a really moderate fire behavior at night because the relative humidity is so high. So
Right.
kind of doing this like safer situation of burning. So yeah, all of those things were just sort of like, I felt like my mouth was just constantly falling open as I was like, wow, what is this? Wow, look at that helicopter dropping water, just like everything
Yeah.
so
I,
new.
it sounds like a pagan ritual in a way.
Almost, yeah. I mean, and there's that way that something kind of like primal and ancestral in us is connected to fire. You know, fire in many ways, at least for early human beings, was our source of heat and safety and cooking. And, you know, so in so many ways, while now fire has become this destructive force on the landscape and this, you know, disaster and catastrophe many times, fire originally was this life giver for us. So I think something in a human being still connects to that, and you see fire and you know that it's a power, and you know, can be a power for good or ill.
I've had a very small version of the experience of fighting a fire, but can you tell us what it feels like and sounds like to be fighting a major fire?
Yeah, so a major wildfire that's fully involved, especially one that's sort of like running crown fire or something that's torching a lot, it's very loud. The fire itself, if it's torching multiple trees, it kind of sounds like the roar of a jet engine. You know,
Mm.
it's like this whoosh sound in the background. So you have that happening, but then the actual firefighting apparatus is really loud as well. So you'll have helicopters slicing through the sky, and you'll have multiple crews and a lot of chatter back and forth on radios. And then you'll have chainsaws going as you're constructing the line, people shouting. So there's really so much going on at once. And then if you're going direct, as we call it, if you're right next to the flames, at any point, you know, there obviously is that like crackling, and that roar of things going up in flames can be like really close to you. Obviously, if the fire is too big, we're not getting that close. But yeah, it's a wild scene. There's a lot going on at once, and you have to really, you know, have your head on straight, be paying attention, be alert, and you know, follow the directions of your leadership.
I got the impression as I was reading that a lot of that you almost go on automatic and follow that guidance that you're talking about, but then there's a after fire time of reflection where you experience what you've been through. And there's a scene in the book where you see yourself in a mirror at home. You're on R&R for the first time
Mhm.
during your first season. Talk about the toll on a person's body.
Yeah, so not only are you absolutely filthy, you know, you don't shower for usually 14 days while you're on an assignment. So you're covered in dirt, you're covered in ash. A lot of times you have sort of like you can see where the ash covers your legs and then ends at the top of your sock, you know, and it's white where your socks were. But then there's wear and tear on the feet. So a lot of times you have, you know, blistered feet, sore feet. I had like a toe that went numb, my big toe went numb, and it just stayed numb for the better part of 2 years. And then your hands, it depends if you're digging or if you're running a chainsaw, but if you're digging, as I was, your hands get really calloused and
Mhm.
blistered, and then kind of like the calluses will peel off and you'll form new calluses. Sometimes they're bleeding. Where your pack hits your shoulders, if you're digging a lot, I got like raw chafed spots there. And then there's a lot of like people have joint problems from running chainsaws. People have joint problems in their knees from all the hiking
Yeah.
underweight. Yeah, it's just kind of endless. You know, then you've got like ash in your ears, ash in your nose, ash in the creases of your skin. And then, you know, if you've inhaled a lot of smoke, which we all have, some people will develop a chronic cough by the end of the season. So there's, yeah, wear and tear on the body outside and in.
You are clearly smiling as you say this. How can that be?
Well, it's so strange. There's just something about being out there and working that hard and being filthy. It's so gratifying. It's like nothing else that I've ever done and will ever do. And that even the being filthy and being in pain is this amazing experience. Like, I loved it and I miss it. And yeah, when I think about being that dirty, I'm like, I just want to go back out there and be that dirty and tired again. It was great.
Okay, because you were making a difference. I get it. I get it.
Yeah, yeah.
Another major part of the book is the tensions involved in being the only or one of a few women in an intensely masculine profession. Can
hmm
you encapsulate that maybe in one or a few words?
Sure. I think when you're the only woman, there can be a tendency for you to be tokenized. So you sort of come to represent all women in the job.
Hmm.
And that can be really difficult because obviously you're just one person and women, like all people, are infinite and varied and can look many ways. But for me, I felt that I really needed to be excellent in order to prove not only that I could do the job and be competent and be respected, but that women could. So I really took on that responsibility to represent all women and embraced it in a way and was like, well, I'm going to make women look great or, do my best too. But it gets more complicated then when you have multiple women and then they start to be compared to each other.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's doing this intentionally. I had a great crew. They really did support me in so many ways. They were respectful. But I think it's almost this unconscious, it's that unconscious bias that happens. And people are then saying, well, we have this one woman and she does things this way. Now we have a new woman.
Yeah.
Why isn't she doing things in the way that we now think women do things? You know?
Yeah, a little bit of falling back into a pattern and just wanting to run on automatic is part of it. But the
Mhm.
dynamic that happened when another woman joined the crew was really interesting.
Really interesting and really complicated. And, I am not innocent in that because I had sort of really adapted to be kind of like one of the guys. And my whole approach was like, I'll just be as tough as possible. I'll never complain. I'll offer to carry the heaviest things and I will just try to blend in here.
Hmm.
And when another woman joined, her approach was different. And I kind of fell into that same thing where I compared us to each other. And I was like, well, if she's going to be a woman here, she should do things my way because it's worked for me. Like I've gained a place here where I feel like I am respected and
Yeah.
I'm not thought of all the time as the girl on the crew. I'm just thought of as a crew member. So if she wants to do that, she should do things like I did. And that wasn't really fair of me, in hindsight, of course, like at the time I didn't see that at all. But yeah, it became very tense between her and a lot of the people on the crew, and then between the two of us.
Hmm.
And it's just so unfortunate, but I've heard that story from a lot of other women in firefighting that a similar dynamic has played out, especially when there's only the two. So that's really interesting.
People obviously learned a lot from the experience, and romance and sex and the problem of figuring oneself out it runs throughout the entire story. How would you explain to somebody how an extreme profession like this changes one?
I mean, I feel like it's a crucible of sorts. I was just talking to another female firefighter about this the other day that it can bring out the very best in you. So, you're asked to dig so deep and to find more strength and endurance than you ever thought was possible. So, for me, I learned that I have much more capacity to keep going than I ever thought I did. That I could climb
Mhm.
that hill I never thought I could get up. So you have this, it brings out the very best human qualities, like things I never thought I could do, I learned to do. But on the other hand, like any crucible, like any really stressful situation, it can also bring out your worst, or
Yeah.
just sort of can bring out drama and interpersonal conflicts. And yeah, there's always like some romance going down between somebody and somebody else, because you're constantly together, right? Like you're just living together 24 hours a day for 6 months. So obviously there's going to be a downside to that. So yeah, it's like the very best and the very worst.
And extreme.
And yeah, total extremes.
This is a great place to stop and take a quick break. We'll be right back. And now let's get back to the conversation with Kelly Ramsey. She's the author of Wildfire Days, A Woman, a Hotshot Crew, and the Burning American West. Kelly, a lot has been changing in the American West over the course of the past decade. Fires have exploded in size, but there's also a profound change in the way that we're thinking about protecting the forests. I'm wondering how you see the Forest Service firefighting forces changing as the prevalence of wildfire increases, and there are so many budget cuts from Washington, D.C. What
Mhm.
what do you feel like we're headed into? And
I feel like I don't even want to say we're headed into. I think we are already
yeah.
have been in a crisis of staffing in federal firefighting. The Forest Service, but also, Department of the Interior, all federal firefighting. There's been so much attrition in the past, particularly I would say 5 to 7 years. A lot of that is caused by as you said, the increase in fire intensity, prevalence, the duration of the season, the
Mhm.
job just becoming an already hard job becoming harder. But it's also due to a lot of problems with pay at the federal level.
Yeah.
There was recently a permanent pay increase approved by Congress, which is great. That's progress. But wildland firefighters who work for the federal government still aren't paid what they pay, CAL FIRE
Mhm.
firefighters or municipal firefighters. So you've seen a lot of people leaving for better pay in firefighting outside of the federal government. But it's also just the duration of the season and the assignments and the difficulty of the job leading to incredible mental health problems. And so people have been leaving for all kinds of reasons, but whatever their individual, justification, they have been stepping away from federal firefighting. And then on top of that, you have everything that the current administration is doing in terms of, not hiring back seasonals, letting people go who
Mhm.
might have, ancillary fire responsibilities attached to their job, even if they're not a primary firefighter. So it's a total cluster right now. And it really frightens me because we already were understaffed on a lot of fires that I went to in 2020 and 2021. And that problem is deepening. So we're going to see even more fires where the incident commanders are asking for resources and they're unable to get the resources they need because there simply aren't enough firefighters to go around.
That is a really interesting idea that you introduce. And there's the preparedness levels that we have with regard to our readiness to fight fire. And preparedness level 5 is the worst case situation. What's going on in preparedness level 5?
At preparedness level 5, yeah, all the resources or most of the resources are already committed. So say, you have 100 hotshot crews in this country, and
Hmm.
at a preparedness level of 2 or 3, maybe 30% of those, I'm just making up a percentage, I don't know what it
Sure.
is, 30% of those are already committed to fires. So a huge incident sparks off in Southern Oregon, right? And that incident commander calls for 5 hotshot crews or 10 hotshot crews, and they're able to get them. The order is filled, right? And those resources show up and they start putting in fire line and they're able to catch, the leading edge of the fire. At preparedness level 5, all 100 hotshot crews might already be committed, or 95 of them might already be committed. So that fire sparks, that incident commander calls for 10 hotshot crews, and they're only able to get 1 or 2. So
Hmm.
then you have this situation where that crew is sent to try to catch a 5 or 10 mile stretch of fire line, and they only really have the capacity to catch a mile. And so you're going to see fires that are lost or fires that take way longer to contain. And you're also then putting that crew or that engine or that bulldozer or that helicopter, whatever the resource is, you're putting them in danger.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're going to see happening.
You think we're going to be at PL5 most of the season going forward until we start to staff back up?
I imagine. I mean, if they're transparent about what the resources are and where they're assigned, one of the problems to my mind is that we never even know exactly how many firefighters are employed. It's hard to get
Mhm.
clear numbers. But yeah, I think we're going to be at a PL5 earlier this year for sure.
You just mentioned putting the crews in danger, and obviously, as the resources are stretched further and further, that's going to be more likely. There's a passage where you talk about how the Rowdy River hotshots are being trained about the experience of the Storm Canyon fire back in the 90s, in which 14 firefighters died when the fire raced up the hill and basically trapped them.
Mhm.
How dangerous this is the job, and are we getting better at reducing the danger of the job?
I mean, it's quite dangerous. There are usually fatality incidents every season or every year, and I think the average in recent years has been right around 15 to 20 fatalities each season.
Hmm.
And it kind of goes up and down, but in general, I do not think that number has really dropped a lot over time. We do so much training, we do so much education, about how to avoid, you don't want to construct fire line with fire below you. There are these like watch out situations and these standard firefighting orders, and we try to avoid these risks. But to some extent, the job is just risky and it's unpredictable. And so sometimes things just happen. So yeah, I don't think the profession is really getting any safer. We try, but you can't keep every tree in the forest from falling over and hitting a firefighter. You cannot
Yeah.
prevent every boulder from rolling down a hill. So, these things really sadly just still happen, and the risk is there, and you just have to be aware of it and try to protect yourself.
There was a passage where you described a tree falling on somebody and they actually weren't hurt. I thought that would be the turning point where you lost someone, but it's surprising what happens in the field.
Yeah, yeah, and the tree luckily wasn't a large diameter tree. It was about an 8-inch diameter tree. And he had his hard hat on, and it struck his hard hat and gave him a concussion. But yeah, he was really uninjured, which is very lucky. That's not always what happens. But yeah, it is wild what happens in the field, and it also is pretty amazing. We train so much on extracting somebody, so putting somebody on a backboard and getting them out of the backcountry and to the hospital. And it's pretty amazing with how much we have drilled that, how seamlessly everybody springs to action and gets that person backboarded, in minutes.
As the environment warms, it's also going to be harder to work outside. How do you think the advent of even greater global warming is going to change this profession?
Yeah. I think there will probably be just more periods of the day where you have to shut down. I've already seen that happen sometimes when we were in the Southwest in June and it was 116 degrees. You reach this point where you can't run the chainsaws because they will geyser fuel when it's too hot. And obviously, also your body has a lot of trouble operating when it's 116 degrees and you're doing
Yeah.
manual labor. But the equipment won't even work. So I think I've had those times where you just have to like find some shade, sit down for a couple hours, wait for the temperature to drop in order to work again. I think you're going to see that. But of course, then when you have to shut crews down during that time of day, then the fire is just allowed to kind of run
Sure.
unchecked. So I think probably you'll see more of that.
I mentioned earlier that your backstory runs through the book, and I don't want to unfold all of it because people should read the book to find out. But particularly, you talk about your father's self and family destroying behavior, and you make a comment near the end of the book about the fact that the experience of fighting wildfire provided you with a perspective on his, and this is a quote, fire of his self-destruction.
Mm.
Is that partly what took you to the forest?
I think it is, although I don't think I really knew that at the time. But in hindsight, my childhood and my young adulthood even were pretty difficult. Having this alcoholic father, feeling like my family was fractured. And I think like so many of us who love the outdoors and who love the wilderness, I was going outside trying to find something. So partly trying to find myself, trying to heal myself, but also looking for somewhere that I could fit and a place to belong, maybe a new family. So, without spoiling the book, I think that is what I went into that job unconsciously seeking. Where can I fit in? Where can I find a sense of meaning and a place?
That sense of self-revelation really comes through. It was a really enjoyable read, by the way. Thank you for writing it.
Thank
What
you.
would you tell a young person who cares about the wilderness if they asked you whether they should become a hotshot?
Yeah, I would say do it. And
Really?
yeah, I would also say that there are other great ways to participate, and if they don't want to do something as intense and as risky as being a wildland firefighter, there are a lot of crews, but also volunteer organizations who are working on the preventative side, so doing
Hmm.
prescribed burning, indigenous cultural burning. There are a lot more partnerships now between indigenous tribes and the federal government and nonprofits that are trying to do this really, really critical work. So, to my mind, if I ever go back into something fire related, I would try to do the prescribed fire side of things because we need so much more intentional fire in order to prevent these incredibly severe catastrophic wildfires. So I guess I would say, if you want to be a hotshot and you're up for the challenge, you should definitely do it. It's the most incredible job. But if you don't want to do something kind of at that level, there's a lot of other ways that you can get involved and try to, protect the forest, protect our communities.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice because there are some amazing programs, for instance, led by the National Forest Foundation, where they're seeking to engage local communities in those prescribed burns and other fuel reduction activities.
Absolutely.
As you think about the wildfire scenario that we face, what's your advice for people who live in wildfire-prone areas? I do, for instance. What should I be thinking about?
Yeah. Well, okay, so you should be thinking about your defensible space, so clearing brush, even dead leaves against the side of your house, clearing everything out within that 100 feet around your structures. And also where you can, house hardening. So
Hmm.
maybe changing the materials or finding ways to make your house less flammable, essentially. Also, having your go bag ready, having your things ready and really
Yeah.
paying attention to those evacuation warnings and leaving when they say to leave. Like you not only risk your own life if you stay, but you risk the lives of firefighters who might come in to try to get you to evacuate. But I would also say, just adding to what we were just talking about in terms of fuels reduction and prescribed burning, that it would be great to find your communities. A lot of people have these like fire safe councils in their
Mhm.
community or some other group that is trying to protect the entire town or the entire county or whatever it is from wildfires. And so you can get involved in doing prescribed burning, fuels reduction, maybe creating fuel breaks or just advocating for that work. So I think really getting involved in the prevention side at your local level is a great thing to do, in addition to just, protecting your property and yourself.
That's great advice because we cannot fight this on our own. We have to pull together to do so.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, the federal government is stretched too thin and is really struggling right now. So we need these local partnerships, nonprofits, community members to step up and do what they can.
So you just finished your book. It's out now. What's next for you?
Well, I have an 8-month-old baby, so between the book and the baby, I've been pretty busy with that. But I think I was just thinking about this. As I said, I would like to get back into some sort of fuels reduction work or prescribed burning. So I think I
Mhm.
probably will be looking at getting back into the woods maybe next summer when my daughter's a little bit older.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been a fascinating conversation it's an inspiring read. Thanks for the book.
Thank you so much, Mitch. I love talking to you.
Welcome back. You've been listening to my conversation with Kelly Ramsey, author of the new book Wildfire Days: A Woman, a Hotshot Crew, and the Burning American West. Kelly spent 2 years on the fire line, and you can learn more about her and the work she's continuing to do for forest health at kellylynnramsey.com. Kelly Lynn Ramsey's all one word, no space, no dash, and Lynn is spelled with two N's. kellylynnramsey.com. We live in a time of growing wildfire danger and a strange dichotomy that lionizes some types of heroes, particularly entrepreneurs and politicians, while largely ignoring the everyday heroism that characterizes American life. We usually hear about firefighters only when they die, but it's their daily choice to enter the fire zone that provides the security that we can all feel at home. Ordinary heroism doesn't get the credit it deserves, and we all, Americans and people in every nation, demonstrate the commitment to serve others, to serve nature, and show the care for the world that can be our climate salvation someday if we all stick to the task of protecting and ultimately restoring the natural world. That's a new and important heroism that we need to practice. Kelly talked about going outside to find herself, something that all of us experience when we step beyond the city limits, when we go over the hill and explore the wilds. Humans have been doing this, well, since the beginning, and it is why our species stands on every continent today. And unfortunately, the climate era will require more ordinary heroism, whether by participating in prescribed burns near your home or by people willing to endure the extremes of fighting wildfire. These hotshot crews are extraordinary people, folks. But the question is, will Americans get the opportunity to support the force as the Trump administration slashes federal budgets? A January 2025 poll by More in Common found strong bipartisan support for wildfire relief just before the cuts to the national parks, Forest Service, and other federal land management agencies began. In fact, 78% of Americans, including 90% of Democrats who were polled and 72% of Republicans, supported federal assistance to California after the devastating Los Angeles wildfires. Now, however, even FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is on the chopping block at a time when disaster preparation is more needed than ever. And we need more firefighters as the U.S. Forest Service struggles to staff for a summer that is expected to see more fire, not less. As Kelly explained, we will likely be at preparedness level 5 for more of the fire season, and that's when the call for a hotshot crew will go unanswered for lack of staffing, leading to even greater danger for those brave firefighters who can answer the call. So it's an extreme time calling for extreme bravery and commitment. Each of us can do our part to protect our communities. In fact, it is only by working together that we create our communities. If you live at the urban wilderness interface, harden your home, perhaps by installing a metal roof and fire-resistant siding. Create a 100-foot perimeter around your house with no vegetation, and stay tuned to warning systems so that you can evacuate for your safety and that of the firefighters who are dedicated to protecting you and your home. And I strongly suggest, in fact, I encourage you to take the time to read Wildfire Days because you're going to come away with a greater appreciation for the heroes battling blazes in the mountains of the American West. And I hope you'll take a moment to check out the more than 500 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear that we've produced to date. You know, writing a review on your favorite podcast platform about us will help your neighbors find us. So, folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste and to prevent wildfire. Tell your friends, family, and coworkers they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.